Unlock your potential today at skillbakery.com.
Now in this one, we'll learn how to create SolidStart API routes to expose public endpoints to our users. For that, the first thing that we need to do is create a directory called lib or library. So we'll say lib, and inside this, what we'll do is we'll be creating some files like database.ts, that's db.ts, and another file which will make use of the users. So we'll say users.ts. Now, the idea is that we will have a users model, and that model will be persisted in the database. Now, the database needs to be created first. So for that, we'll be making use of the unstorage npm package. Now, the unstorage npm package is basically a file-based database. And for this, we will be actually making use of two things: the unstorage package itself, and then we will have the fs driver, which will actually store the user data. So here we'll say npm install unstorage. So now that the package has been installed, let's go ahead and make use of the package over here in our db.ts file. So we'll have our create storage from unstorage and then fs driver from the unstorage driver fs. And here, as I mentioned, we'll have a model, user model. So we'll have an interface over here that is going to contain the ID, first name, last name, page, and timestamp. After this, we'll be creating our storage by making use of the fs driver. So here, we'll simply say create storage, and then we'll pass the driver as fs driver, and this is the file-based storage that we have now. After this, we'll be simply initializing the database with some dummy users, and for that, we'll be making use of asynchronous function. So here we have our storage.getItem users, and if it's not existing, then we will be creating our user collection. So we have John and Jane over here, and that's pretty much it. The users will then be stored over here using storage.setItem. So we're making use of storage.getItem to retrieve the users and storage.setItem to store the users. So here you'll notice the key and value, and here we are only passing the key. So now that's done. Let's go ahead and export this storage from here, and we have our storage exported. Let's save this now. The other file that we will be creating is the users.ts file. Now in the users.ts file, we'll be first of all importing storage and user from database file. So these are the two things that we had over there, and we'll be importing it over here. Next, we will be creating some functions which will be used to query this db.ts file from users.ts file. So it will be like get users first. So here you'll say get users, and if you'll notice, this is calling storage.getItem users whenever this method will be called. And after that, we can have another which is going to return only a single user based on the ID passed over here. So that is going to return one user only based on the matching ID that we have. And next we have add user. Add user is supposed to add a new user using the storage.setItem and then return that. So let's save this over here for now. Here we have resolved the issue with the return users by asserting that the type returned by this storage.getItem will be of user collection. So that being said, we are done with our db.ts file and users.ts file. Let's go ahead and create API directory inside the routes directory that we have so that we can expose this as an API. So we'll have our API directory created. Now, the next thing that we need to do after creating the API directory is to create a users folder. And within the users folder, we'll be having another file created called index.ts. So remember, earlier when we had our routes created, we had this index.tsx file, and this file was by default called whenever the web page loaded for us or the home page loaded for us. Similarly, when we have over here API users, and here we have the index.ts file. So this is the file that will be called when we'll just say API/users in the browser. So here in our index.ts file, will be, first of all, importing two things: the get user and add user method from the lib directory that we had. And then we'll also be having the API event. So here, the API event will be called from SolidJS start server. So once we have these two imports over here in our index.ts file, we can move ahead and create the first API method, and that method will be basically returning all the users that we have in our local storage. So that will be done using the get call. HTTP get verb will be used, and here we have the function get, and you can see that we are passing a parameter over here of type API event, and here behind the scenes we are calling get users, which we define in our lib users file. This is going to return all the users from the local file-based storage that we have, and it will be presented to the end user. Now, next thing that we need to do is create another method, and this time around this is going to add a user. So for that, we'll be making use of the post HTTP verb, and the method is going to be post over here. And here you can see we are expecting first name and last name and age from the API. And once we have that, we will be creating a new user, and that user will then be added using the add user method. And finally, the response will be sent back to the browser. So these are the two methods that we'll have over here in our index.ts file. Now you must be wondering how we'll be finding out a specific user or detail of a specific user. For that, we'll have to create another file. Under the users directory itself, we'll be creating a dynamic file, and that is going to be of type id.ts. Within this file, we'll be having our get method defined, and obviously we'll have these two things in place first. So let's copy these two from here and paste it over here as well. Now that we have these import statements in place, here instead of get users, we'll just say get user, because that's what we want over here. And then we can just go ahead and have our API created. So the HTTP verb that will be used going to be get, and here you'll notice that we are passing the ID. Based on that, we're calling the get user method defined in the users file, and if that user is found, we'll say JSON stringify, and the status code will be 200. Otherwise, we'll simply say user not found, and the status will be 404. So now let's save this and go ahead and run this using npm run dev command. And then here, let's go ahead and launch this in browser. So this is the application that we have. Here, if we launch our Postman and then look for this localhost :3000/API/users, we'll find these two records are coming up. Now, if I go ahead and change this from get to post, and over here in our body, let's go ahead and choose the type as JSON. So here we'll select raw, and then the type will be JSON, and the value for this particular request, we can just have a dummy user like Alice with a last name Brown and age 28. So here, if I go ahead and click on send now, you'll notice that this user has been created. And if I switch back from post to get, ideally I should now get 3 records. And there we have Alice Brown. And if I go ahead and just say the ID of the user, so here you see the ID 1, and the username is John Doe for ID 1. If I search for this, you'll notice that that's what we are getting. So that's how easy it is to have a API created. And you just need to ensure that the paths that you provide over here is going to be from the root, not the relative one that I had earlier. So that is something that I just updated before testing out the API calls. If you find the video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe.